The air at Fort Powell, North Carolina, was thick with the scent of pine needles and diesel fuel. It was a world unto itself. A sprawling city of green and beige where discipline was the currency and respect was earned through sweat and grit. For most, that meant proving yourself on the firing range, in the grueling obstacle courses, or in the simulated chaos of urban warfare training. For Sergeant Anya Sharma, it was supposed to be different. Her domain was not the battlefield, but the cavernous warehouses of the Logistics and Supply Command, or LOGCOM, as it was known. Her world was one of manifests, shipping containers, and the quiet hum of computer terminals. Anya was good at her job. In fact, she was exceptional. She had a mind like a steel trap, capable of tracking thousands of different items, from MREs to tank treads, across a global supply chain. She could tell you, down to the last bullet, what was in Warehouse 7B and when the next shipment of medical supplies was due from Germany. She saw her work as the backbone of the army. An army, after all, doesn't march on an empty stomach or fight with an empty rifle. It was a critical, essential role. But on a base full of warriors, or at least men who saw themselves as such, essential was not the same as respected. The daily slights were like a steady, dripping faucet. They were small, often subtle, but they wore you down. It was in the way they looked past her in the chow line, their eyes scanning for someone they considered a real soldier. It was in the condescending tone they used when they had to request supplies, as if they were speaking to a clerk at a hardware store, not a non-commissioned officer. They called her support staff, and the words were always laced with a faint, dismissive sneer. Sometimes, they'd call her the box checker, or the supply girl. The worst of them was a group of infantry soldiers from Bravo Company, led by Sergeant Rex Miller. Miller, who insisted his men call him Bulldog, was the walking embodiment of military arrogance. He was barrel-chested with a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite and a swagger that seemed to take up more space than his physical frame. He and his crew had done one tour in a relatively quiet zone overseas, but they carried themselves like seasoned veterans of 100 battles. They saw the world in a simple binary. There were fighters, and there was everyone else. Anya, in their eyes, was firmly in the everyone else category. Their favorite haunt was the canteen, a large, sterile room with linoleum floors, vending machines, and a collection of mismatched tables and chairs. It was the base's social hub, a place to unwind after a long day. For Anya, it was often a place to endure. One Tuesday afternoon, she was sitting alone at a small table, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing a logistics report on her tablet. The low murmur of conversations was broken by the loud, booming laughter of Miller and his two shadows, Corporal Davis and Specialist Finn. They sauntered in their combat boots thudding against the floor and made a show of grabbing sodas from the machine. Well, look what we have here, Miller said, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. He walked over to her table, his shadow falling over her tablet. It's Sergeant Sharma, holding down the fort. Making sure all the paper clips are accounted for? Davis and Finn snickered on cue. Anya didn't look up. She kept her eyes fixed on the screen, her fingers scrolling through a list of serial numbers. Just doing my job, Sergeant Miller, she said, her voice even and calm. Your job, Miller scoffed, leaning his hands on her table. Right? Pushing papers? While we're out there, doing the real work, keeping the space safe. Anya finally lifted her eyes. They were a deep, steady brown, and they held his gaze without flinching. Every job on this base contributes to its safety. Miller, your rifle is useless without the ammunition I track. The medics can't save lives without the bandages I order. Don't ever forget that. Her directness seemed to surprise him for a second. He wasn't used to the support staff talking back. But he recovered quickly, a smirk spreading across his face. Feisty. I like it. But a pen isn't a rifle, Sharma. Don't ever forget that. He winked at his friends and they moved off to their own table, their laughter echoing behind them. Anya took a slow, deep breath and went back to her report. She was used to it. She had learned to build a wall around herself, a quiet space where their words couldn't penetrate. She focused on the numbers, on the precision of her work. It was her shield and her refuge. Her father, a mechanic who could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to it, had taught her the value of quiet competence. Let your work do the talking, Anya, he used to say. Loudmouths are just trying to drown out the sound of their own insecurities. She knew he was right. She could see the insecurity behind Miller's bravado, but it didn't make the sting of his words any less sharp. She had joined the army for the same reasons as many others. For structure, for a chance to serve, for the opportunity to be part of something bigger than herself. She hadn't expected a parade, but she had expected a baseline of professional respect. From across the room, Major Evans, a senior officer with a perpetually weary expression, watched the exchange. He saw Miller's posturing and Anya's quiet dignity. He had been on this base for 15 years and had seen this dynamic play out 1,000 times. The eternal friction between the tip of the spear and the shaft that supports it. His philosophy was simple: let them sort it out themselves. It builds character, he thought, taking a sip of his own stale coffee. He turned his attention to the news playing on the small television mounted in the corner. A local news reporter was standing in front of a county sheriff's office. The group, who call themselves the Patriot Guard, are becoming increasingly bold in their rhetoric, the reporter said. Law enforcement officials are warning residents to be vigilant, though they stress there is no immediate threat to the public. Major Evans grunted. Some local militia nonsense. Every few years, a new group popped up, full of angry men playing soldier in the woods. They were usually harmless. He dismissed it and went back to his paperwork. Anya, however, had also been listening. As she packed up her tablet, she glanced at the screen. She saw the logo of the Patriot Guard, a coiled snake over a stylized flag. She noticed a look in the eyes of the men pictured in the report. It wasn't the look of harmless weekend warriors. It was something colder, more determined. It was a detail most people would miss. But Anya Sharma's job was to notice details. It was a skill that went far beyond tracking inventory. And as a faint rumble of thunder sounded in the distance, signaling an approaching storm, she felt a prickle of unease that had nothing to do with Sergeant Miller and everything to do with the look in those men's eyes. The storm was coming, and she had a feeling it would be much bigger than anyone at Fort Powell could imagine. The world outside of Fort Powell was Anya's sanctuary. She lived in a small, immaculately clean apartment in a quiet complex about a 15-minute drive from the base. It was a simple space, decorated in muted tones of gray and blue, with a single, thriving orchid on the windowsill. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal trinkets on the shelves. It was a space of order and control, a reflection of her own mind. Here, she was not support staff. She was just Anya. Her evenings followed a strict, unvarying routine. After a quick, healthy dinner, she would change from her uniform into simple workout clothes. This was the part of her day that no one on the base knew about. It was her secret, the source of her quiet confidence. 3 nights a week, she drove not to the base gym with its clanging weights and loud music, but to a private members-only shooting range tucked away in an industrial park on the other side of town. The owner, a retired Marine sniper named Sal, would just nod at her as she came in. He never asked questions. He just respected the intense focus she brought to her practice. He had seen thousands of shooters in his time, from nervous first-timers to seasoned law enforcement officers. He had never seen anyone quite like Anya tonight. She started with a standard-issue M9 pistol, the same kind carried by officers on the base. She loaded the magazine with a fluid efficiency that spoke of thousands of repetitions. Standing in the lane, she took a single, calming breath, and the world seemed to slow down around her. The first drill was a simple target acquisition exercise. 3 targets, spaced several feet apart. Her movements were a blur. The gun rose, barked 3 times in a rapid, controlled rhythm pop, pop, popped hand, then was back in the low-ready position. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. Downrange 3 paper targets, each had a single, perfect hole in the center of the head zone. She didn't smile or show any sign of satisfaction. She simply ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and prepared for the next drill. This one was more complex, involving shooting while moving, reloading under pressure, and engaging targets at varying distances. To an observer, it would look like a deadly dance. Each step was precise, each turn of her body economical. She moved with a grace that was completely at odds with the clunky administrative image her colleagues at Fort Powell had of her. Was where she honed the skills her father had first taught her. He had been a competitive shooter in his youth, and he had seen a natural talent in his quiet, observant daughter. He taught her trigger control, sight alignment, and, most importantly, the mental discipline required for true accuracy. Shooting isn't about the gun, Anya, he'd said, his voice smelling of oil and steel. It's about you. It's about making your mind, your eyes, and your hands work as one. It's about focus. That focus was her escape. At the range, there was no Sergeant Miller, no condescending looks, no feeling of being underestimated. There was only the target, the sights, and the moment of perfect stillness before the shot broke. Back on the base, the culture of arrogance continued. Rex Miller and his team grew bolder in their taunts, fueled by their own self-importance. They would intentionally submit supply requests with errors, just to see if Anya would catch them. She always did, returning the forms with polite, impersonal notes pointing out the mistakes. It infuriated them. Her quiet competence was a constant, unspoken challenge to their loud, boisterous claims of superiority. One person who saw past the facade was Master Sergeant Gus Riley. Gus was a lifer, a man with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands from a career spent in the motor pool. He was in his late 50s, with a gentle smile and eyes that had seen it all. He often came to LogCom to sort out parts for the fleet of Humvees and transport trucks. "Don't let them get to you, Sharma," he said one afternoon, leaning against her counter as she processed his request. "I don't," she replied, not looking up from her screen. "The hell you don't," Gus said gently. "I see it, the way you hold your jaw. Look, those boys in Bravo Company, they're not bad soldiers, they're just young and dumb. They think being loud makes them strong. You, on the other hand," he tapped his temple, "you've got the real strength. Up here, Don't ever let them make you doubt that. Anya finally looked at him and offered a small, grateful smile. Thanks, Gus. Anytime, he said, taking his paperwork. Just keep doing what you do. His words were a small comfort, a reminder that not everyone on the base saw her through the same dismissive lens. Meanwhile, the shadow of the Patriot Guard was growing longer. Their activities were escalating from angry online posts to real-world actions. They held public rallies that bordered on riots. There were credible reports from state police that they had acquired a significant cache of automatic weapons and explosives. The threat was becoming tangible, a low hum of anxiety that vibrated just beneath the surface of daily life in the surrounding towns. Fort Powell responded by increasing its security posture. More guards were posted at the gates, and patrols along the perimeter fence were doubled. But it was all routine, a checklist of security protocols. The prevailing attitude, especially among the combat units, was that no one would be foolish enough to attack a federal military installation. It was unthinkable. The base command, in an effort to boost morale and project a sense of normalcy, decided to go ahead with its annual Family Day celebration. It was the biggest community event of the year, a day when the gates were opened to the families of the soldiers. The main community center, a large modern building with a gymnasium, a cafeteria, and several meeting rooms, would be filled with music, food, and laughter. It was meant to be a symbol of the Army's connection to the community, a day of peace and celebration. Anya was assigned to manage the logistics for the event. It was a massive undertaking, coordinating with civilian vendors, arranging for tables, chairs, and sound systems, and ensuring the food supply for thousands of people was in place. It was the ultimate support staff job, and Miller and his crew didn't miss the opportunity to mock her for it. Heard you're in charge of the bouncy castle, Sharma. Finn had yelled across the parking lot a few days before the event. Anya had just ignored him. She was too busy. She had walked every inch of the community center, mapping out delivery routes, checking power outlets, and memorizing the locations of every fire extinguisher and first aid station. She knew the building's layout intimately, from the main hall to the winding service corridors and the cramped storage rooms in the basement. As always, she was thorough. The day before the event, as she did a final walkthrough, she noticed something odd. A side entrance near the kitchen loading dock had a new lock, but the doorframe was slightly damaged, as if it had been recently forced and then hastily repaired. She made a note to report it to base security. It was probably just a careless delivery driver, she thought, but the detail lodged itself in her mind. Another piece of information filed away in the vast, orderly warehouse of her memory. The family day was supposed to be a day of rest, but as she looked at the slightly wood of the doorframe, Anya Sharma felt that familiar, cold prickle of unease. Something was not right. Family Day dawned bright and clear, the Carolina sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The grounds of Fort Powell were transformed. The usual stern military atmosphere was replaced by a carnival spirit. Red, white, and blue banners fluttered from every lamppost. The air was filled with the smell of popcorn and grilled hot dogs, the sound of a brass band playing cheerful marching tunes, and the happy shrieks of children chasing each other across the manicured lawns. The heart of the celebration was the community center. Inside, the gymnasium was packed. Families gathered at long tables, soldiers in relaxed uniforms bounced babies on their knees, and toddlers stared in wide-eyed wonder at a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat on a small stage. It was a perfect picture of American life, a brief, joyful respite from the rigors of military duty. Anya was in her element, though she remained on the periphery, with a clipboard in hand and a radio earpiece. She moved with quiet efficiency through the building, a ghost in the machine of the party. She made sure the ice in the drink dispensers was full, that the trash cans weren't overflowing, and that the civilian vendors had everything they needed. She was in her standard-issue uniform, the ACU camouflage pattern that seemed to make her blend into the background. She was an organizer, a facilitator. She was support staff. Sergeant Bulldog Miller and his team were also on duty, assigned to a light security detail. For them, it was a joke of an assignment. They leaned against the walls, arms crossed, their expressions a mixture of boredom and superiority. They were tigers in a petting zoo, warriors forced to babysit a bake sale. They saw Anya bustling past and exchanged smirks. "Look at her go," Davis muttered to Miller, queen of the party planners. Miller grunted in agreement. Probably the most action she's seen all year. He took a long, slow sip of his soda, enjoying the feeling of being a guardian at rest, a protector observing his flock. Major Evans was also in the crowd, off duty for once, trying to enjoy a rare afternoon with his wife and 2 young sons. He was laughing at something his youngest said when the world shattered. The first sound was the shattering of the main glass doors. It wasn't a gunshot. It was a series of heavy, percussive thuds, as if a battering ram had been used. Before the crowd could even process what was happening, men in dark clothing poured into the room. They weren't dressed as soldiers. They wore black tactical vests over civilian clothes, their faces obscured by ski masks, and they were heavily armed. The rifles they carried were not the standard M4s of the U.S. Army. They were AK-47s, rugged and menacing. Panic erupted, screams tore through the festive atmosphere. People scrambled, knocking over tables and chairs in a desperate attempt to flee or find cover. The attackers moved with a brutal, practiced efficiency. 2 of them fired short, controlled bursts into the ceiling. The deafening roar of the rifles echoed in the large hall, instantly silencing the screams and replacing them with whimpers of terror. "Nobody move," a voice bellowed through a megaphone. "This building is now under the control of the Patriot Guard. Lie on the floor, now. Hands on your heads." Anya was in a back storage room, checking on a backup power generator, when she heard the first screams. Her blood ran cold. She instantly killed the light in the room and cracked the door open just enough to see into the main hall. Her mind, trained to observe and assess, went into overdrive. She wasn't seeing a chaotic mob. She was seeing a planned assault. She counted at least a dozen attackers in the main hall alone. They were spreading out, covering the exits. Their movements were coordinated. This wasn't some random act of violence. This was an invasion. In the main hall. The initial shock had caught everyone off guard. Miller and his 2 men, Davis and Finn, had instinctively reached for their sidearms, but they were too slow. Before they could even clear their holsters, 2 attackers were on them, pressing the barrels of their rifles into their backs. "Soldiers? Huh," one of the terrorists sneered, ripping the pistols from their holsters. "Not so tough now, are you?" Miller, Davis, and Finn were forced to the floor with the rest of the hostages, their faces burning with a humiliation that was even more intense than their fear. The great warriors of Bravo Company, disarmed and neutralized in seconds. Major Evans, shielding his family with his body, was also among the helpless crowd on the floor. From her hiding spot, Anya watched the scene unfold with a terrifying clarity. She saw the fear on the faces of the children, the despair in the eyes of her fellow soldiers. She saw the leader of the Patriot Guard, a tall man with a commanding presence, directing his men, ordering them to herd the hostages into the center of the room. Her training, both the official Army logistics training and the secret intense training at Sal's range, kicked in. Her mind became a whirlwind of calculations. Layout, she knew this. Building better than they did. She knew every corridor, every closet, every air duct. Numbers, at least 12 in the main hall, probably more, covering other areas. Weapons, mostly AK variants, some sidearms, no visible explosives, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Hostages over 200, including dozens of children. High-value targets like Major Evans. Her radio earpiece crackled to life. It was base security, their voices frantic and confused. "All units, we have a hostage situation at the community center. I repeat, a hostage situation. Perimeter is being established. SWAT is en route. Do not engage." SWAT. That was good. But she knew how long that took. Establishing a perimeter, gathering intelligence, setting up negotiators, formulating a breach plan. It could take hours. Looking at the cold, determined eyes of the attackers and the terrified faces of the hostages, Anya knew they didn't have ours. These men weren't here to negotiate, they were here to make a statement, and that statement would be written in blood. She had to make a decision. She was a sergeant in logistics. Her orders were clear: do not engage. She was support staff. A box checker? A party planner. To try and intervene would be to break every rule in the book. It would be insane. But then she saw a young boy, no older than 7, sobbing quietly on the floor. One of the attackers walked by and kicked him lightly. "Shut up, kid," the man snarled. In that instant, something inside Anya snapped. The rules, the regulations, the condescending labels, they all melted away. All that was left was the core of who she was, a soldier, and soldiers protect people. She let the storage room door close silently. The room was dark, smelling of dust and cleaning supplies. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her hands were perfectly steady. She knew there was a security locker in the building manager's office, just down the hall. It contained a single emergency sidearm. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot she had. Moving with a silence she didn't know she possessed, she slipped out of the storage room and into a narrow service corridor. The sounds of the crisis in the main hall were muffled here. It was just her, the concrete walls, and the decision that had just changed her life. She was no longer Sergeant Sharma of Logdam. She was the only person on the inside who could do anything, and she was going to act. The service corridor was a hidden artery running through the heart of the community center. Anya moved through it like a phantom, her soft-soled boots making no sound on the dusty concrete floor. She knew these passages from her logistical surveys, the secret geography of the building that was invisible to everyone else. This was her territory. She reached the building manager's office. The door was locked. A quick expert check told her it was a simple pin tumbler lock. From a small toolkit she always carried in a pouch on her belt, she pulled out 2 small tension wrenches. It was a skill she had learned from a retired special forces soldier who taught a non-standard entry course she had taken on her own time. Within 20 seconds, she heard a soft click. The door swung open. Inside, the security locker stood against the far wall. This lock was more formidable, a combination lock, but she had anticipated this. During her event prep, she had noted the make and model. A quick search on her phone's secure browser weeks ago had given her the manufacturer's default master code. It was a long shot. Most people changed to default, but in a low-security environment like a community center, people got lazy. She held her breath and dialed the numbers. 255010. She pulled the handle. It didn't move. Her heart sank. Then, she remembered something from the manual. On this model, you had to turn the dial one full rotation to the right past the last number. She did. She pulled the handle again. This time it opened with a heavy clunk dot inside. Nestled in foam was a Beretta M9 pistol and 2 full magazines. It felt solid and familiar in her hands. She performed a quick functions check, the clicks of the slide and safety echoing softly in the small office. She loaded a magazine, chambered a round, and holstered the weapon under her uniform jacket. She was armed. Now, the real work began. Her plan was not to launch a frontal assault. That would be suicide. Her strategy was one of attrition. She would be a ghost, picking off the enemy one by one from the periphery, sowing confusion and thinning their numbers before they even knew what was happening. She slipped back into the service corridor and made her way towards the kitchens. She knew from her observations that there was a single guard posted at the rear loading dock. He was their lookout, their rear security. He had to be the first to go. She found a ventilation grate that looked down into the kitchen hallway. Peered through the slats, she saw him. He was young, nervous, pacing back and forth, his AK-47 held loosely in his hands. He was isolated. Perfect. Anya moved to a nearby janitor's closet. She found a heavy floor buffer, a big clumsy machine. She unplugged it, wheeled it to the top of a short flight of service stairs, and gave it a hard shove. The buffer crashed down the metal stairs with a deafening metallic roar. The guard in the kitchen hallway jumped, startled, and spun around, raising his rifle towards the sound. "Who's there?" he yelled, his voice cracking. That was the only invitation Anya needed. While his attention was diverted, she slipped out of the corridor, came up behind him in his blind spot, and struck. It wasn't a gunshot. It was a precise, disabling blow to the side of his neck with the butt of her pistol. The man crumpled to the ground without a sound, unconscious before he hit the floor. She quickly relieved him of his rifle and radio, zipped at his hands and feet with ties from her toolkit, and dragged him into a walk-in freezer, leaving the door slightly ajar so he wouldn't suffocate. One down. Now she had a radio. She put the earpiece in, listening to their chatter. They were confused. The leader, a man they called Warden, was demanding to know what the noise was. The guard she had just taken out, Echo 4, wasn't responding. Echo 3, Echo 5. Go check on 4's position. Now. Warden's voice was sharp, angry. Anya's lips curled into a grim smile. He had just sent 2 more lambs to the slaughter. She knew the route they would take. There was a long straight hallway connecting the main area to the kitchens. It was a perfect kill zone. She positioned herself in a small alcove, concealed behind a stack of catering supplies. She waited. Her breathing was slow and steady, her heart a calm rhythmic drum. Seconds later, 2 more Patriot Guard members came jogging down the hall, their rifles at the ready. "Think he just fell asleep," one of them muttered. "Warden will have his hide," the other replied. They were careless, overconfident. As they passed her position, Anya stepped out. She was no longer using her pistol. She held the captured AK-4. She didn't spray bullets. She fired 2 perfectly aimed single shots. Thump, thump. The rifle was louder than her pistol, but the sound was contained within the back hallways. The 2 men dropped, each with a single round to the chest. 3 down. Back in the main hall, the hostages heard the muffled sounds. A wave of fresh fear rippled through the crowd. What was happening? Were the attackers starting to execute people? Rex Miller, lying face down on the floor, felt a shame so profound it was like a physical illness. He, Bulldog Miller, was helpless. He could hear the sounds of a battle he wasn't part of, and he was terrified. All his swagger, all his bravado, had evaporated, leaving behind a raw, primal fear. He was just another victim. The SWAT team had now fully encircled the building. The commander, Captain Thorne, was trying to get a clear picture of the situation. "We have unconfirmed reports of shots fired inside," he said into his radio. "Negotiator, can you raise them?" "Negative, Command," came the reply. "They're not responding to any calls." Thorne was getting a bad feeling. Standard procedure was breaking down. He didn't know how many hostiles, how many hostages, or what their objective was. He had no eyes inside. He had no idea that a lone log-dump sergeant was methodically dismantling the threat from within. Anya, meanwhile, was on the move again. She had taken the radios from the 2 men she'd just neutralized. She now had 3 radios, which allowed her to listen to multiple channels and get a better sense of their command structure. She learned they had 2 more men watching the side exits and a sniper on the roof. The rest, about 6 of them, including the leader, were in the main hall with the hostages. The sniper was her next target. If the SWAT team decided to breach, he would be their biggest problem. She knew the roof access was through a maintenance ladder in a utility closet on the 2nd floor. She made her way there, moving through the empty, silent upper hallways of the community center. It was eerie. A party venue turned into a hunting ground. She found the utility closet and climbed the ladder. Pushing open the roof, hatch a crack, she peered out. The sniper was positioned at the far edge of the roof, looking down at the police cordon below. He was focused, his powerful rifle resting on a bipod. He felt secure, untouchable. He never thought the threat would come from behind him, from the roof itself. Anya slipped out of the hatch, staying low, using the large air conditioning units as cover. The sun was hot on the tarred roof. The wind whistled softly. She closed the distance, her movements slow and deliberate. When she was 20 feet away, she rose, her captured rifle leveled. "Drop it," she said, her voice calm and clear. The sniper spun around, his eyes wide with shock. He had no idea who she was or where she came from. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his hand twitching towards his rifle. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Anya fired a single shot. The sniper collapsed. For down. She was now in a race against time. The SWAT team would be getting impatient. They might try a rooftop insertion, and she couldn't risk a blue-on-blue incident. She had to end this, and she had to do it now. She had taken out the outer security. All that was left was the core group in the main hall. The most dangerous part of her mission was about to begin. The situation inside the main hall was deteriorating rapidly. The leader of the Patriot Guard, Warden, was losing control. His men were not reporting back. The silence on his radio was a growing, terrifying void. He paced back and forth in front of the terrified hostages, his rifle held tight against his chest. He was a cornered animal, and that made him more dangerous than ever. "What's going on out there?" he snarled at his second-in-command, a twitchy man named Kale. "I don't know," Kale stammered. "No one's answering. It's like they just vanished." Warden's eyes darted around the room, paranoia creeping in. He felt like he was being watched. He felt the invisible net closing around him. His grand statement, his moment of glory, was turning into a disaster. Outside, SWAT Commander Thorne made a decision. "They're not talking, and we have shots fired. They're executing hostages. We're going in. All teams, prepare for a dynamic breach on my command." The message was broadcast on a frequency the terrorists could overhear, a standard tactic to try and force a surrender. It had the opposite effect. Panic flared in Warden's eyes. "They're coming," he screamed. "It's over." In his desperation, he lunged forward and grabbed the nearest person. It was Major Evans's 7-year-old son, Timmy. Warden yanked the boy to his feet and pressed the cold barrel of his rifle against the child's small head. The boy let out a terrified cry. "Everybody back," Warden shrieked, his voice cracking with hysteria. "One more step and he's dead. I swear to God. I'll do it." The other 5 remaining terrorists raised their rifles, their fear making their trigger fingers tremble. The room was a powder keg, and Warden had just lit the fuse. 4. Rex Miller. Lying on the floor, this was the ultimate nightmare. He saw the terror on the boy's face and the insane look in the attacker's eyes. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred for his own weakness. He was a sergeant in the United States Army, and he was about to watch a child be murdered. But high above them, in the darkness of the ceiling, another soldier was at work. Anya had made her way to a maintenance catwalk that ran above the main hall's suspended ceiling. It was a space she knew from checking the HVAC systems. It was cramped, hot, and crisscrossed with pipes and wires. Crouching on the narrow metal walkway, she could peer down through the gaps in the acoustic tiles. She had a bird's-eye view of the entire scene. She heard the SWAT commander's announcement. She saw Warden grab the child. She knew she had seconds, not minutes. A frontal assault by the SWAT team would be a bloodbath. The terrorists would open fire on the hostages at the first sign of a breach, and Warden's finger was tightening on the trigger. A direct shot at Warden was impossible. The pot angle was bad, and the child was in the way. A single miss, a single bullet passing through, would kill the boy. She needed a different solution. She needed to create a moment of opportunity. Her eyes scanned the scene below, her mind working like a supercomputer. She saw the 5 other terrorists clustered nervously near Warden. She saw the hostages, frozen in terror, and she saw the massive decorative chandelier hanging in the center of the room, directly above the group of terrorists. She knew from the building schematic that the chandelier was held by a single, thick steel cable attached to a winch mechanism right next to the catwalk she was on. It was a crazy idea, a 1-in-a-million shot, but it was the only one she had. She crawled silently along the catwalk to the winch. It was an old manual system with a large brake lever. If she released it, the multi-ton chandelier would drop. She couldn't just drop it. It would kill them, but it might also swing wildly and harm the hostages. She needed to disable, not obliterate. She needed to create chaos. Using her knife, she began to saw at the thick steel cable, not all the way through. She frayed it, weakening it, until it was held by just a few strands of steel. It was a painstaking, nerve-wracking process. Any sound could give her away. Down below, Warden was screaming into his radio. "I want a bus, and a clear path to the airport. You have 5 minutes, or the boy dies." Anya knew her time was up. She moved back along the catwalk until she was directly over Warden. She carefully removed a ceiling tile, creating a small, dark opening. She lay flat on the catwalk, peering down through the hole. She leveled the captured sniper rifle she had taken, From the roof, the shot she had to make was the most difficult of her life. She had to hit Warden in a non-lethal but instantly disabling way. She had to sever his control, his ability to pull the trigger. She aimed for his shoulder, the complex intersection of muscle and bone that controlled his trigger arm. She took a breath, the world narrowed to the space inside her rifle scope. She saw the bead of sweat rolling down Warden's temple. She saw the tear rolling down the child's cheek. She exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Below, Warden's body convulsed. The rifle flew from his grasp as his right arm went limp, shattered by the high-velocity round. The child, shocked but unharmed, scrambled away. The other terrorists were stunned. For a critical second, they stared at their fallen leader, their minds unable to process what had just happened. That second was all Anya needed. She yelled into the radio she'd taken, using a voice of pure command. Now, it wasn't a signal for the SWAT team. It was for her. As the terrorists looked up in confusion at the hole in the ceiling, Anya swung her legs over the catwalk, grabbed a thick pipe, and dropped down into the room, landing in a crouch like a cat. Simultaneously, with her other hand, she threw a heavy wrench she had been carrying. It flew through the air and struck the frayed winch cable. The weakened strands snapped out. The massive chandelier didn't fall straight down. It dropped a few feet, then swung like a giant pendulum, right through the space where the stunned terrorists were standing. It didn't crush them. It swept them off their feet like bowling pins, sending them crashing into the walls. Dazed and disoriented, just as the SWAT team blew the main doors off their hinges and flooded into the room. It was already over. They stormed in, ready for a firefight, but found a scene of bizarre, silent victory. The terrorists were scattered and incapacitated. The hostages were shocked but safe. And in the center of it all, standing calmly with a rifle held at the Loretti, was a single female soldier. Her uniform was smudged with dust and grease from the ceiling, but she stood as if she were the calm center of the storm. Rex Miller pushed himself up from the floor, his mind reeling. He had seen it all. The shot from nowhere, the soldier dropping from the ceiling, the impossible, brilliant chaos of the chandelier. He stared at the woman who had just saved them all. It was Sharma, the box checker, the support staff, SWAT commander. Thorne lowered his weapon, his face a mask of utter disbelief. He cautiously approached Anya. Who are you? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Anya looked at him, her eyes tired but clear. She slung the rifle over her shoulder. Sergeant Anya Sharma, she said, her voice steady. Logistics and Supply Command. The aftermath was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Medics rushed in to tend to the wounded, who were, miraculously, only the terrorists. FBI agents and military police began securing the scene, their faces grim and professional. The hostages, wrapped in shock blankets, were guided out, their tearful reunions with loved ones filling the air. Through it all, Anya Sharma stood quietly to one side, answering questions in a calm, matter-of-fact monotone. The debriefing room at the base command center was thick with tension. Major Evans, Commander Thorne, and a handful of high officials sat around a polished table, watching the security footage on a large screen. They watched in stunned silence as the video played out Anya's actions. They saw her systematically dismantling the outer guard posts. They saw her silent, deadly efficiency. They cross-referenced the timestamps. She had neutralized 4 hostiles and was moving on the final group before the SWAT team had even received the green light to breach. She cleared the room faster than my entire team could get through the door, Thorne said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and professional embarrassment. The precision of that final shot. I have operators who've trained for 20 years who couldn't make that shot. Under that pressure, Major Evans leaned forward, his face pale. He felt a profound sense of shame. He had seen the disrespect she endured. He had seen her quiet competence and dismissed it as unimportant. He had allowed a culture of arrogance to flourish under his command, a culture that had almost gotten his own family killed. The most powerful moment of reckoning, however, happened away from the official inquiries. 2 days later, Anya was in her office at the Logcom warehouse, back at her desk, trying to find a sense of normalcy in the familiar world of spreadsheets and inventory lists. The door opened. It was Sergeant Rex Miller. He stood in the doorway, without Davis or Finn, without his usual swagger. He looked smaller, diminished. He held his patrol cap in his hands, twisting the brim nervously. Sergeant Sharma, he began, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. Can I have a word? Anya looked up, her expression unreadable. She simply nodded. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the floor, at the scuffed toes of his boots. I came here to apologize. He stammered. What I said, how I acted, there's no excuse for it. I was wrong. I was an arrogant fool. He finally looked up, and for the first time, Anya saw not the bulldog, but the man behind the mask. She saw fear, shame, and a deep, humbling gratitude. We called you support staff, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We laughed at you. We thought we were the tip of the spear, but when it all went wrong, we were the ones who needed support. You didn't just save those people, you saved us, you saved me. Anya listened, her hands resting calmly on her keyboard. She could have said 1,000 things. She could have reminded him of his taunts, thrown his own words back in his face. But that wasn't her way. She saw his apology for what it was, genuine and complete. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We're all on the same team, Sergeant," she said softly. "That's all that matters." Miller swallowed hard, nodding as if in a daze. "Yes, ma'am," he said, the ma'am coming out without a trace of irony. It was pure, unadulterated respect. He turned and left a changed man. A few weeks later, the entire base was assembled on the main parade ground. The sun was bright, the flags snapping smartly in the breeze. On a raised platform stood Anya Sharma, flanked by Major Evans and the highest general on the East Coast. Major Evans read the citation, his voice clear and strong. He spoke of her extraordinary heroism, her uncommon valor, and her decisive action in the face of overwhelming odds. He recommended her for the Soldier's Medal, the highest honor the Army can bestow for heroism in a non-combat situation. As the general pinned the heavy ornate medal to her chest, the parade ground was silent for a moment. Then, a single person began to clap. It was Rex Miller. Soon, his entire team joined in. Then the rest of Bravo Company. Within seconds, the entire assembly of thousands of soldiers, from the lowest private to the highest-ranking officers, was on its feet, delivering a thunderous, sustained standing ovation. It was a sound of profound respect, an apology, and a thank you all rolled into one. After the ceremony, a reporter from the Army Times managed to get a question in. "Sergeant Sharma, there are rumors that you've been offered a spot in the Special Forces training program. Are you going to take it?" Anya looked at the reporter, the metal gleaming on her uniform. She smiled, a genuine warm smile that seemed to light up her face. "I'm honored by the offer," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet field. "But I've respectfully declined. I'm staying right here." The reporter was taken aback. "But why? After what you did, why would you want to stay in logistics?" Anya's smile widened. She looked out at the crowd of faces, at the warehouses in the distance, at the complex, living machine that was Fort Powell. "Because every role is essential," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound confidence. "A weapon is useless without a bullet. A soldier is useless without supply. Excellence isn't about the job you have, it's about how you do it." Her words hung in the air, a simple truth that resonated deeply with everyone who heard it. She had earned their respect not by becoming a gunslinging warrior like them, but by proving the profound value of who she had been all along. Her quiet, unwavering strength had done more to change the culture of Fort Powell than any battle ever could. The final shot was of Anya, a week later, back at her desk in the log-com warehouse. The medal was pinned proudly to the uniform she wore. She was leaning over a manifest, her brow furrowed in concentration, her finger tracing a line of serial numbers. She was still support staff, but now, when people at Fort Powell said the words, they said them with reverence.